Welcome back. You're watching Business Week on Arise News. Joining me to review some of this week's business stories is Dr. Ola Brown. She is the founding partner of Healthcare Capital Africa, a Pan-African investment company focused on investments that create a healthy world. So good to see you, Dr. Ola Brown. I know you're joining me from somewhere in the Middle East. Welcome.
Already, I'm in Cape Town now.
So we have a few stories to discuss today, and I wanted to start with one story that we've known since the start of the year, ChatGPT and AI. So let's talk about what's going on here. There's so much frenzy. I think Microsoft is also bringing out its own version. What can we expect from that market?
So artificial intelligence, as a venture capital investor, actually, artificial intelligence has been a trend for those who invest primarily in innovation for the last decade. And what we've seen, as we see in most sort of innovative investment classes, is there's a lot of excitement, and then, we can't really find use cases. And then there's another huge sort of surge of excitement, and then, it kind of goes down. So this is sort of probably the fourth wave of excitement around AI, because there's actually like a very firm use case. And it's not a B2B use case. So it's not a business to business use case. It's something that consumers can actually use. So it's one of the the fastest downloaded application, I think, of all time. Really exciting. And instead of being answering questions like Google, so directing you to web pages, what's so fantastic about ChatGPT and why it's created so much excitement is it actually gives unique answers. Which is exciting. But I think your question is more around what the wider use cases for not just this application, but AI now bring. It's definitely brought a surge of investment in AI from Microsoft, from Google, some of it great, some of it not so good. So we've had a few unfinished projects released into the market.
Yeah.
One particular bot was quite rude and quite aggressive, and they really have to work on sort of making sure that these applications do give the right answers. They're not necessarily biased, they're not racist, etc. So I think there's a lot of work to be done there.
And if I may ask, we've seen quite a lot of interest from investors and some valuation significantly. So it initially appeared to be a high barrier market. But so many companies are coming up with their own version of artificial intelligence chatbots that it strikes me that valuations would eventually fall in the longer term.
Absolutely, as they always do. Like I said, this is probably the fourth wave of excitement about AI. But what excites me even more is the other use cases that we can have for AI. So, example, I've invested in a company that uses AI to look at radiological reports for patients. Making it harder to misdiagnose a patient, say, on an X-ray or a CT scan. So the exciting thing and the thing in the news is about these chatbots and being able to get answers to questions really quickly, like, what's sort of the best resort in Lanzarote, or, what should I be eating for breakfast? But I think, the wider effect of this increased interest in AI is, of course, some of the life-saving applications that this technology has. And I'm very, very excited about that as well, and looking to invest more in it myself.
Yeah, great insights there. Thanks. Now to Singapore. Singapore growth prospects didn't perform as well as one would have expected. But then there's the issue of China and the fact that Singapore depends so much on trade and tourism for China. Do you see that picture changing? What is your prognosis for Singapore's economy?
So I think that Singapore is primarily a services-based economy. And as you reported a bit earlier, even the big four service companies, so KPMG, EY, they're expected to make staff cuts. When you see services having to make cuts, when you see service-based economies beginning to shrink, then it's a symptom, not a cause, to use medical language. It's a symptom of a wider downturn in the economy. Singapore is very dependent. It's a big financial center. And when you see financial services, for instance, less activity in that service sector, then it's a symptom of a wider economic downturn, a more global trend. And, an indication that this year might not be the most buoyant year for the global economy. But what does that mean to the Nigerians listening? Because I'm sure a lot of Nigerians are wondering, okay, why are we analyzing Singapore? What does Singapore have to do with what is happening in Ikorodu? But actually it does. When there's a global downturn, you see an instability in financial markets, particularly the major financial centers, Singapore, New York, London, Paris. When there's instability in those markets, actually there's something called a flight to safety, where investors are like, oh my gosh, like we don't know what's happening. Let's just put all of our money in in developed countries and their treasury bonds, as opposed to being adventurous and investing in countries like Nigeria or Ghana or Togo or whatever. So it affects us because it makes people nervous. And when people are nervous, they go for safety. And Nigeria doesn't register highly in the minds of most global investors when it comes to safety. It's when they're feeling adventurous and stable that they invest in Nigeria. And obviously, one of the major components of GDP is investment. We do need foreign investment. Also, when there's global instability, there's less aid and donor spending. African countries, maybe not so much Nigeria, but the countries that surround us definitely rely on that. So we see less of that. Some countries are, extremely dependent on aid for their budgets. And when there's global instability, there's less aid coming in. And the last thing, the way it affects us is, of course, remittances are a big part of the Nigerian economy. I once read that, the money that we receive in remittances competes with even the amount that the amount of the entire Nigerian budget. When people in developed countries, even Nigerians in developed countries, experience a downturn, like we're seeing in Singapore, like we might see in Britain, like we're seeing in America, obviously they're not going to be sending money to you. And that means that, a significant contributor to people in Nigeria or to the Nigerian economy goes down as well. So those are the three ways that I think that, what's happening in Singapore is important to us and we should be interested in it.
Yeah, and very important to keep an eye on those trends in the Orient. Now, Fitch is saying that Nigeria is going to face some significant post-election challenges. If you recall, Fitch had downgraded Nigeria back in November last year. And there's still concerns around its debt servicing and other key indicators. Which one of these challenges pointed out by Fitch do you think is going to bite in particular? And how can the country manage it?
Okay, so there's three groups of challenges that I think that will be, paramount after election. There's the fiscal challenges, there's the monetary challenges, and there's the structural challenges. The fiscal challenges are to do with government spending, number one, and to do with the way government makes money, number two. And government makes money primarily through taxation of the oil and gas industry and of corporates, as well as individuals. So tax reform is one thing, trying to get more money into the tax net, as well as trying to reduce government spending and maybe even looking to restructure some of our debts, not because we're distressed, not because we can't pay, but because we just need that extra bit of fiscal space to be able to develop our own country without using 70-80% of it to pay back debt. And luckily for Nigeria, we don't have a significant dollar debt as some African countries do. So we have a greater proportion of our debt in Naira than a lot of African countries that have really only borrowed externally. And so because of that, when you know people that have given you Naira, it's easier to talk to them and it's easier to restructure. And also compared to some other countries, we're not completely crushed by Eurobond debt. So some of our debt is to more friendly parties than the Eurobond investors that are completely commercial. So I think that might be something that, a key discussion after the election. And I spoke about monetary as well as fiscal. So looking at how we can, bring back growth to the economy. And that means perhaps looking at our interest rates again and seeing, is it feasible for businesses to borrow at these interest rates? And should we be making monetary decisions with regard to the CRR, with regard to the MPR, to release more money into the economy for business? And finally, structural reforms around ease of doing business. If we can really look at these three areas that Fitch has highlighted, then I think that we'll be on a path to sustainable economic growth in Nigeria.
Great. We've run out of time, Dr. Ola, but you're going to stay on because we'll be chatting about the healthcare sector outlook for Nigeria as well. Thanks for joining us for now.